Okay. Good day to everyone. Today is the fourth and the last day of the Second ISC Winter School on Information Security and Cryptology. The title of this talk is White Box Cryptography, Security Goals and Foundations, and the talk is given by our two speakers, Chris Brzuska. Chris is a professor at Aalto University in Finland. He is a faculty member of the Department of Computer Science as well as the Department of the Mathematics and Systems Analysis, and his research focuses on cryptography and its connections to IT security. Our second speaker is Alpirez Bock Estuardo. Estuardo is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Mathematics and Systems Analysis at Aalto University in Finland. And he recently obtained his PhD under supervision of Chris, which is co-advised by Will Michels. His research focuses on definitional studies for white box cryptography, as well as on the design of automated attacks on white box cryptographic implementations. Just a few comments. The during of our talk is 90 minutes, and we have 3 breaks during the talk. We plan to have the first break at 27 minutes into the video. The second break comes in minute 31, and the last one is at minute 53. You can simply leave your comments in the chat box, and note that our speakers are available to answer questions on the chat during the presentation. Now we can start.
Okay, so we're gonna play a video, and yeah, I hope if in case there's some issues with the sound or anything, please let us know.
Hello everyone, this is Chris and my name is Estuardo and we're from Aalto University in Finland, and we're gonna be talking to you today about white box cryptography. In this lecture we're gonna be alternating some parts. I'm gonna be telling you some parts and Chris is gonna tell you some parts, and I hope you find this topic interesting, and I hope you have fun. So on previous lectures, you were introduced, or you were studying the gray box attack scenario, and this is mostly related to hardware cryptographic implementations, and you consider an adversary who gets access to information generated by the device executing the program, the implementation, and then you have adversaries who are able to exploit this side channel information in some way that they might find key dependencies that that help them break the cryptographic implementation here. And in the white box attack scenario, we consider software cryptographic implementations, and we consider an adversary that gets access to the implementation code here. And yeah, in these software cryptographic implementations, we were always considering them to have an embedded secret key. And given the white box access to the implementation of the adversary is able to inspect the code, he's able to modify it as well, and he can also control the execution environment, so he can collect input-output pairs and perform static or dynamic analysis, and he can also record memory calls during the computations. So in white box crypto, what we aim to do is we aim to design cryptographic implementations in such way that they remain secure even in the presence of such strong adversaries. Yeah, so this is a small outline of what we're going to be talking about. So in the beginning, we're going to have an introduction to the studies of white box crypto when they were introduced in the academic environment, and what they were motivated by, and what are the popular use cases that we have for them today. and then we're going to be talking about the security goals that a white box program should achieve, and how this has been captured in security notions that have been published in the literature. Then we're going to be talking about white box crypto in the real world, like how they are implemented in real life, and what are some known attacks on these implementations. And then we're going to conclude with some outlook of possible things that are left to study in the context of white box cryptography. So now use cases and introduction. So the white box attack scenario, or white box cryptography itself, was introduced or motivated by the use case of cryptographic programs in the context of digital rights management applications. So in DRM, what we have usually is a broadcaster or a content creator who is transmitting information in the form of broadcast, and he's sending all this information in encrypted form. And then we have a set of users who subscribe to the service, and then by subscribing they obtain a program which allows them to decrypt this information that is being broadcasted. And so the idea here is we consider that one of these users might be a malicious user, and he might want to extract secret information from his program in order to misuse it, like in the sense of sharing it with friends who did not pay for the subscription, for instance, or maybe even reselling these programs and then making profit out of it. And so the idea is that with a white box program, it should be difficult for an adversary to extract information from the program that would let him do this, or to redistribute it in other ways. So it's a tool to try to mitigate piracy in this sense. So in the first time that we saw white box cryptography in academic literature was in 2002. It was introduced by Chow, Eisen, Johnson, and Van Orscott. And in this year, the authors published two papers. One where they were introducing a white box implementation of DES, and in the other one, they were introducing a white box implementation of AES. And in both cases, they describe pretty much a methodology for implementing white box crypto in these two for these two ciphers. And what the framework that they propose, so it's similar for both cases. The idea is that you implement your cipher as a network of lookup tables, and in the lookup table you have the secret key hard-coded in it. That means the lookup table is dependent on the secret key that you're going to be using, and then in order to obfuscate the lookup tables and to make it difficult for the adversary to extract the secret key from just looking at the lookup table, we apply encodings, linear and non-linear encodings to them. So the idea is that in the beginning of the algorithm, or for each lookup table, the output is obfuscated by some transformation, and then in the next lookup table, the one which is fed by the previous one, we apply the inverse of this transformation in such way that the encodings are cancelled. And so this framework has been adapted in the literature and by the industry, and it has been studied quite long, and it has been attacked as well, and so on and so on. But this idea of implementing ciphers as a network of lookup table is a popular approach for implementing white box crypto. So we're going to be talking later a little bit more about implementations and so on, but just to give you an idea of what was introduced in the very beginning. So those papers that we were talking about were introduced in 2002, and in 2015, Android introduced host card emulation, which would allow applications running on the regular CPU of a phone to communicate using near-field communication. And here, the payment industry saw an opportunity for implementing payment applications in software that would have a bit more flexibility. And here, white box cryptography was proposed as a method for trying to protect these applications or to increase their security here. And then from this point on, we saw a bit of an increase on the interest of white box crypto in academic studies, for instance. So as you can see, this use case is a little bit different, because in the previous one we consider that the owner of the application is an adversary, and we're trying to protect the application itself. But here it's a little bit nicer, because we want to protect the owner of the payment application, right? So yeah, also in academic studies, I think this use case is a little bit more welcome, I would say, or at least that has been my impression here. So yeah, if you're not very familiar with these applications, so they basically substitute the use of traditional credit cards. So the idea is that when I'm at a shop or something and I want to pay at a terminal, yeah, I bring out my phone, and with the application I make the payment. Basically, in these applications, what they do is they store so-called limited use keys, which are user-specific keys that are meant to be used for a very small amount of times. And they are stored in encrypted form. And then whenever I want to perform a payment, I decrypt them, and then I use this limited use key for generating a request message, or it can be seen as a MAC message. So this limited use key is personal, and it should identify myself, or authenticate myself, sorry. And here, when we talk about a white box program, we're talking about the combination of these two programs all wrapped up together. And why white box crypto? Well, because we might consider the fact that our phone might be infected with some malware that might be able to observe this information without us knowing, and so we don't want the adversary to, for instance, be able to recover this LU case and then just go somewhere and use them for making payments in our name. So here's where I say that we're protecting the user itself. Okay. So now Chris is going to be talking to you about the security goals and notions that have been proposed and studied, motivated by these two use cases.
Yeah, so security goals and notions for white box cryptography, this is actually a difficult topic, and I will share with you our understanding, kind of based on the state that we have right now. Most of the times, if you ask someone, so what are the goals of white box cryptography, the first answer that you will obtain is the key should be hidden. And of course, this is definitely necessary, because if you can extract the key, then everything's lost. Another view of white box cryptography is to see white box cryptography as special purpose obfuscation. So obfuscation is a research area that aims to, or a technique that aims to make programs unintelligible while preserving their functionality. So white box cryptography, in a way, it's in particular, if it's hiding the key, it's somehow obfuscating the functionality of the program. So this is also one way of viewing white box cryptography. And so one thing that is kind of a very relevant threat, and that's not covered neither by thinking about hiding the key nor by thinking about obfuscation, is the issue of redistribution attacks. So in the attack scenario for digital rights management that Estuardo discussed earlier, we had the user, and the user might want to redistribute the program. But for this, the user does not need to extract the key. The user could just copy the entire program without extracting the key, and it achieves the very same goal. So in this case, you could just redistribute the copy of the same program. Okay, but what about mobile payment applications? So in mobile payment applications, the same type of attack might happen. And maybe, well, now let's recall the attacker is not the user. It's some malware running on the phone trying to attack the user. But the payment application on my phone should not run on someone else's phone. And so if it's possible to copy the payment application, then you can also use it for payment somewhere else. So therefore, we also need to protect against this type of code lifting attacks. So the type of attack that moves the code from one device to another in the payment application scenario. So what can we do against code lifting attacks? So let's start with the notions that have originally been introduced in the context of digital rights management and see how they connect. So two very popular security notions for kind of mitigating this type of code lifting attacks are traceability and incompressibility. Just to mention a couple of articles that introduce or rely on these notions. So let me now go into both of these notions and see what they say, and let's then reflect upon how this notion can be interpreted in the context of the mobile payment scenario. So traceability means that the white box program is watermarked using a tracing key. So each program has its own tracing key. So then if a user makes a copy of the program, then the tracing key will also be contained in the copy of the program. And we can identify the original owner of the program by seeing which tracing key was embedded into the program. And so what white box cryptography tries to achieve here is to really link the implementation with a tracing key so that the tracing key cannot be removed from the implementation. Okay, so you can see why this is a useful notion. You can see why this is a useful notion in the DRM scenario, because redistributing programs is illegal, and if you can be traced if you do this, then it creates an incentive not to redistribute the program. In the payment scenario, the situation is a little bit different, because if I have my payment application on my phone, I have no incentive to redistribute it anyway. I just give other people access to my money. So if someone can later trace back that it was my program, then nothing is gained. And in particular, it doesn't prevent an attacker who gets access to the code and copies it to a different device. This type of attacker would not bother by being clear that the money originally belonged to me. All right, so traceability is not so useful notion in the context of a payment application when we try to mitigate this type of code lifting attacks. Okay, so the second mitigation technique that has been popular in the DRM scenario is incompressibility. And the idea here is that I take my encryption program and I compile it into a giant program with the same functionality, such that for every chunk, if I remove a small chunk of it, then the program becomes dysfunctional. And the idea is that if I want to redistribute such a program on the network, in particular if I want to redistribute it many times, then it becomes a little bit harder if it's a bigger program. In the context of the payment application, the situation is a little bit different, because firstly, an attacker is not trying to redistribute the program many times. It just tries to distribute the program once and then uses it for attacking it. But two other things to consider when using incompressibility as a mitigation attack is that it also makes our programs slow and large in the bad sense, in the sense that this is usually not something that we want from a mobile application. We try to make them small and fast. In particular, also because a small application is easier to distribute as intentioned by the service provider. For this reason, incompressibility is not really used in practice, but it's kind of very nice notion to study theoretically. You can base incompressible white box programs on standard assumptions even. So there is a little bit discrepancy between what we do in theory and what is actually used in practice. Okay, so which other ways could we use to mitigate this kind of code lifting attacks? Maybe I leave Estuardo to discuss this with you.
So an alternative now for incompressibility and traceability is if we could compile our white box programs in such a way that they are able to run only on one specific device. And so the idea is that we're going to have a white box program, and before we perform an encryption, we're going to check if we're running on that one specific device. So in this case, to make it simple, this device is identified by this hardware identifier delta. So if this delta is present, then we're going to output a ciphertext, and if not, then we're gonna output an error. And so this property, we're going to refer to this property as hardware binding, and this is what we know that is being used in practice. So in practice, for instance, for applications running on Android phones, we rely on some secret keys stored in the Android key store, and we assume that the Android key store is difficult to access for a white box adversary, either because it's hardware based or it's located on the trusted execution environment that it's more difficult for an application to access. And so the idea is also that if I remove this program from that hardware, the program is going to lose its functionality completely. And so an alternative can be referred to as application binding, and the idea is that we have a white box program that runs only within one specific application. We shouldn't be able to separate it from the application, or if we do, it should lose its functionality. And this can be useful to mitigate code lifting attacks if the application is implementing some authentication operations. Like, for instance, before performing an encryption, it might ask the user to provide a password or to provide a fingerprint, some unique value. And if this is provided correctly, then the program is going to perform the encryption. So in a couple of years, last year, we presented two works where we studied the property of hardware binding, and we tried to consider how things were being implemented in practice, and then we defined security notions that would capture the properties that a white box program should achieve to be secure here in this context. And so we presented notions for white box key derivation functions, for white box encryption programs, and white box payment applications, or just mobile payment applications, as you say. And we're going to talk about one of these notions in a second. But we also presented feasibility results for the white box KDF and the white box payment application, and they are based on puncturable PRFs and indistinguishability obfuscation. And so our feasibility results are in this context more theoretical than we would like to, in this sense, because indistinguishability obfuscation is still far from practical. But in these works, I like to think about our constructions presented in these works as a sort of a design model of how hardware binding can be implemented. Because if you want to implement a white box program with hardware binding, you can follow the same design strategy You just need to substitute the punctual PRS by more efficient PRS like AES, and instead of using distinguishability obfuscation, you can use some more efficient form of obfuscation that you know. And so, yeah, for application binding, we did not define a security notion because of several challenges that were presented, and I'll talk about them also in a second. So, yeah, so now I'm going to talk about how we define hardware binding. And for defining hardware binding, we do this in combination of a hardware module. And so, so the idea here is that we have this is our device, and the black square there with HW is some secure hardware that we assume that the white box adversary cannot access. And this secure hardware stores some unique hardware main key, this KHM. And so when we want to compile or generate a white box program that should run on this device, we're going to query this hardware with some label which identifies the white box program that we want to compile. And now, based on this label and based on the hardware main key, we're going to generate a hardware subkey. And now, this subkey is one of the keys that we're going to use for the compilation of our program. So we communicate this subkey securely with the entity that is going to compile our white box program. And so the compilation takes place with a key K, which is the symmetric key that we're going to be using for the white box program itself, and this hardware subkey that's going to be useful for the hardware binding functionality. And so we obtain this EncHW, which is our white box encryption program with hardware binding. And we also obtain, we also need some querying algorithm here, because we need to do the queries to the hardware in such way that every time we encrypt a new message, we need to generate a different response from the hardware. The response should be unique for each message that we want to encrypt. So yeah, because I'll explain that in a second. So now we have our white box program, and now we can run it on our device. And now every time we want to perform an encryption, we query. So we generate the query, as you see on the left, with the message and the nonce, and the label which identifies the white box program that's running. And then the hardware is going to generate a response based on the hardware main key, on the label, and on the value queue, the queue. And then it's going to return this response. And this is why we need to have this query algorithm involved here, because the white box adversary, you need to recall, that is running, that is located in the phone. So he might be able to intersect these queries. So if we always obtain the same query response, if we always obtain the same response, then the adversary might intercept it once, and then he might use this response for encrypting any message he wants. So here, if he intercepts this one response, this is going to be useful just for encrypting one single message. And yeah, and so if everything goes well, we will obtain a ciphertext. And then the idea is that if the response is correct, then our white box program is functional equivalent to this encryption program running on the symmetric key K. And so what the white box program tries to do is it tries to recalculate, or it tries to verify the value of the sigma, or the correctness of the sigma of the response in combination of the value Q. So here, for instance, here we have like here we see what the white box program is doing. So it's first going to check if this sigma is correct, and then if it's not, it's going to output an error, and then but if it is correct, then it's going to perform the encryption. Yeah, and so the white box program should be obfuscated in such a way that it's difficult to separate these routines from each other. Because if you can separate the check part from the encrypting part, then you will have a program that allows you to encrypt easily. And yeah, and of course, it shouldn't be possible to extract the secret information from it. Yes, okay. So I think now it's a good moment to have a break and see if anybody wants to ask some questions or want to discuss with us. And then we're going to continue with the presentation.
Yes, please, please do ask questions. Anything really is.
Do we have any?
Yes, it's a good question.
If you have a question, you can simply raise your hand.
Very good question. Yes, so there is both white box cryptography for symmetric crypto and for asymmetric, but so at least like the hardware binding feature is useful also for the asymmetric case.
So it has been usually studied much more in the context of symmetric, because it is the case where you want to. So the idea is you want to keep this efficiency of symmetric crypto, but you want to have it in a scenario where when the adversary sees the cryptographic implementation, that he's not able to break security in the way we were explaining there. But there has been, I think in the industry, you see some implementations of ECC, or so for digital signature. And then in this case, what is being whiteboxed is the operations performed with the secret keys, of course, because with the public key you don't need whitebox, right?
Right. Next question: whether we can
another
detail the
question,
difference between IO and white box crypto. That's a very good. It's a very good question. So the kind of the definition or setup is a little bit different. So firstly, like IO is general purpose obfuscation, so you can obfuscate arbitrary circuits, while white box cryptography is tailored to a specific encryption program. And then the second property is that the definitions are a little bit different. So if you just apply plain indistinguishability obfuscation to an AES encryption program, it's not per se clear that, for example, you would hide the key. At least I would not know how to prove this.
Yeah.
Mr. Abedi, you can talk.
Yes. So I think the big difference is then played on the definition. So like with this example, with applying IO to AES, so you're not able to prove any security there, because you would need to have two AES implementations which are functional equivalent, but use a different key, for instance. I mean, I see it that way. I don't know if Chris also sees it that way. And then by applying IO, this could somehow imply that you cannot tell the difference between each one of the two programs. And then so you don't know how to have an AES implementation with two different keys, which is functional equivalent. Right. Do you think?
We have another question from Mr. Abedi Siavash.
All right.
Whether we think that the
IO and white box structure will be changed in the future by the quantum computers and quantum computing. So for white box to start with, it's very hard already now. so I think I would be happy if we have kind of like publicly known constructions for white box cryptography which remain secure against classical attacks. So quantum, that would be even better, but okay, this is like this is the first thing I think, like already in the classic scenario it's quite challenging. Then for IO construction, like the current constructions are built on lattices, which are on lattice assumptions, which are suspected to be post-quantum secure anyway. So at least in the kind of IO world of things, maybe we are already post-quantum secure, but this is of course very speculative. Not so much is known.
Can you hear me?
No.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we don't. So
Siavash, you
always
can
when
talk.
we're talking about post-quantum crypto or post-quantum research, like we're looking at candidates for public key crypto mostly, and yeah, and until now, White Box has been dealing with symmetric key crypto, especially. So I think yeah, there hasn't been much research done on a possible White Box or IO in the post-quantum world in this sense.
Yes. So yeah, this is a very good point. So these quantum algorithms for attacking cryptography. So there is an algorithm for factoring, and then there is an algorithm which can speed up a search, like exhaustive search, by a square factor. So there of course we tend to double our key lengths, and probably in a white box program we might also, I don't know, maybe have to increase the degree of our masking or something like this. This might be something that's worth consideration, but I'm not aware of systematic study. It's a very good question.
Welcome. Yeah. Should we continue now? Maybe.
Can you hear me? I have one question.
So,
we have another question from, yes, Siavash,
so
you
yeah,
can
and we're gonna define white box crypto with hardware binding.
Okay, before starting, can I ask one question?
White box encryption scheme with hardware binding. And the
maybe
way we're going to do this is we're going to
break.
define a little game where we ask an adversary to distinguish between two scenarios. So let's see what are these two scenarios. So first thing is that we do give the adversary the encryption white box encryption program, and we give the adversary the query algorithm. And so now we also allow the adversary to look at outputs of the hardware. So the adversary can send a query to the hardware and then gets back the response from the hardware. So this models that an adversary might see some query response there from the hardware. And then we allow the adversary to see encryptions and decryptions of messages. And so what we want to say is that the encryption is secure. But what does it mean that the encryption is secure? It means that the adversary really learns no information, not a single bit about the message. And so how do we model this here? So if you look at the first line of this enc function, or oracle, how it's called in these games usually, if you look at the first line of the enc oracle, there we set M0 to be the message that the adversary sent, and we set M1 to be the all zero string of the same length. And then this enc oracle, it either returns an encryption of the message that the adversary requested, or it sends an encryption of the all zero string. And if the adversary cannot distinguish between encryption of the message and the encryption of the all zero string, then clearly the adversary cannot compute any information from the ciphertext, because as adversary could distinguish between these two cases. So, so in a way, you can think of kind of this like the zero message being kind of a real game, and the one message being kind of some ideal game. In the ideal game, the adversary learns nothing about the message except for the length of the message. Okay, and then additionally, for the decryptions, we should not make it too easy for the adversary. So the adversary is not allowed to submit messages that come from the encryption oracle, and also we don't allow the adversary to make the exact same query that was used by the encryption oracle. And yeah, maybe this was a very short part, but maybe that's still a good point to have another break and ask some questions.
Yeah, so
okay.
Yeah.
Siavash, do you want to ask your question?
So now we just had we included this small break in case anybody wanted to ask something related to the security game Chris just described.
We have one question.
If not, we can continue. The next part is going to be related to implementations.
Just a second.
We'll have another break in
we have one question.
Roughly 20 minutes, 25.
Okay.
Shall we?
Yeah, there's a question by Nazur
Yes.
about hardware versus software implementations. I was wondering whether you had additional thoughts on this.
So white box is concerned only with software implementations of the programs, because you have this scenario where you have an adversary who gets access to the program code and who's also able to modify it to its will. And in hardware, this is a little bit different. So in hardware, you might also have invasive attacks, and an adversary might also, I don't know, open a chip, for instance, and from observing it might try to reverse engineering and so on. But we see it as a bit of a different level of difficulty in this sense. And so when we're talking about the white box attack scenario, we're talking only about software implementations, and then any software program that might run in an environment that might be subject to attacks in this case. I don't know if that's what you were asking. But.
Can I continue?
Yeah, if we have time in the end, we have a little comparison about the white box and gray box attack scenario. Maybe we get to there.
Yeah.
Because sorry, it's Nasul. Thank you very much for the presentation. My point about the
injection. So there's actually a part coming about that right now in that part. So if you want, we can play the next part of the video and then right after that. So I think actually the break is planned to be just before that. We talk about the mixing bijections and so on. But just to say it short, it's a linear transformation of the outputs of the lookup tables, and in another lookup table.
We can go on if you want.
I can hear now.
Shall we continue?
Yes.
Okay, so now after we discussed security of hardware binding, another thing that one can consider as some sort of mitigation is binding the white box program to an application. So the first question that arises when you consider binding a white box program to an application is, what exactly is an application, and what exactly are we trying to achieve from this binding property? And I think the most natural application that you can think of as a binding application is an application that authenticates the user. So, for example, you might need the user to type in a password before performing a transaction. And so it's kind of a little bit difficult because the user enters the password once, and if we consider like this white box scenario where the white box attacker is in control of the full device, then by our assumption of the attack capabilities, the adversary should be able to see the password and store it. So then once the user entered it, next time the adversary can just enter it themselves. So another alternative is, okay, we weaken the attack model, the adversary is not able to intercept this password, but kind of see everything else. But this is a little bit of an inconsistent attack scenario. And another issue is that we might need to think about the authentication secrets to be long enough, or we need to count the number of queries that the adversary makes. But if we think of very long secrets that the user has to enter, then you have a completely keyless implementation of your encryption algorithm, because the user actually each time enters the key. And well, okay, then we can consider some keyless implementation, but keyless implementation doesn't need to give you any security on the implementation side. So it's difficult to define application binding, and it's an interesting question. So if you listen to these challenges and problems and you think, no, I have an idea for how to define application binding, do let us know. We thought about it for a very long time, and I think that it's a very hard problem. So now let's move to white box implementation and go a little bit more to the practical side of things.
Okay, so now we discussed or we looked at white box from theoretical studies or definitional studies point of view, and yeah, as you saw, there were some challenges there, with, for instance, with defining application binding. However, in real life, it's useful to have a white box that is difficult to attack. Like in the original paper of Chow, there's a small paragraph where the authors say that their goal was not to have like a completely unbreakable implementation, but rather to make it difficult for the adversary to break it, to extract the key. I'm not sure if they added this after their scheme was broken or if it was always there. But when we're thinking about the white box attack scenario, we should think about having implementations that are difficult to break and making it hard for the adversary to extract information. And we need to think also about the things we can use in our favor, in the sense that we're having software implementations that can be updated, of course. And so if we manage to update them before the adversaries can break them, then we already have something useful. We already have some meaningful level of security that might help in some ways. And so if we look back at the known approaches for implementing white box, like the approach presented by Chow et al. This approach was actually already broken just a year after it was published, and it was broken by an attack known as the BGE attack, which was basically based on reverse engineering the implementation, looking at the lookup tables and removing the encodings from it. And then through this, the attackers were able to extract the key. And so this is, of course, not desirable, but we can also think that in real life, performing such an attack might not be that easy. There's algorithms for solving this problem of removing encodings in a faster way and so on. But when you have a code which is heavily obfuscated, and maybe it's difficult to first locate the lookup tables and so on and so on. And to make things worse, unfortunately for the designers, in 2015, a different line of attacks was introduced. We're going to talk about them more in detail in a little bit. They're known as automated attacks, and they're inspired from side channel attacks. So they got their inspirations from side channel attacks. And these attacks, what they do is they execute your white box several times, collecting input and output pairs, and recording memory addresses accessed during the computation, and then saving them on or displaying them on so-called software traces. So instead of power traces, we have software traces. And then analyzing them the same way that we analyze power traces when performing side channel analysis attacks. We're able to extract the key. And these attacks are much worse because they can actually be performed without needing to reverse engineer the code. So, and in fact, they can be automatized by having a script that just runs your white box many times, records the information. And then once you have the traces, just apply whatever statistical means you're going to be using for trying to find key dependencies. So with these attacks, you could break Chow's implementation very, very quickly, in a matter of minutes, and many other publicly known implementations. So, as of today, we don't know of any published implementation of AES or DES, which is resistant against key extraction attacks. So from this point of view, it's not very good, the picture. In the industry, it seems that whatever is being used is a little bit stronger, but we don't know, or we cannot talk about their resistance to attacks in an open way, because it's not allowed. But there's always some reflection of things so there's always some reflection of the state of the art on the academic work. So the academic work gives us some reflection of the state of the art. But it's not all bad news completely. So we have some positive results in the sense. So there have been capture the flag challenges organized by Chess, and there have been 2 editions. The first one took place in 2017, and here what we had was a competition where designers were invited to submit white box implementations of AES, which should follow rules such as source code shouldn't be larger than 50 megabytes, and the runtime shouldn't take longer than 1 second, for instance. And then we had attackers which were invited to break the implementations. Pretty much anybody was allowed to try to break them, and with breaking we mean extracting the key. So it was really about building white boxes which would remain secure against key extraction. And the longer a white box would stand without being broken, the more points it would gain. And so we had a total of 94 submissions, and many of them were broken very quickly. Most probably because they were vulnerable against such automated attacks. But as you can see, only 13 of them remain unbroken for at least 24 hours. So not so great. All of them were broken, and then the winning challenge was designed by some colleagues of the University of Luxembourg, Alex Biryukov and Alexei Udovenko, and it was broken, and it remained unbroken for 28 days. So this is not so bad if you think about the fact that many of the submitted designs were broken so quickly. When this one remained unbroken for 28 days, you can really think that it provided some meaningful level of security. Yeah, and it was broken by the crypto experts team, which documented how they broke the implementation. So yeah, it obviously took some big reverse engineering efforts, and in fact, some of the submitted designs were presented some interesting compromise between security and efficiency. So obviously this was a competition, and the numbers in terms of speed and size didn't necessarily match what you would desire to be running on your applications. But as you can see here, for instance, the winning challenge is here, the blue spot, the blue dot that we see there. And as you can see, it is noticeably larger and slower than most of the challenges. So all this obfuscation techniques that were implemented obviously took a toll on it. But you see also some interesting ones, like the second best ranked challenge, which is the red square over there. You can see it remained unbroken for 12 days, and it was several megabytes smaller than the winning challenge, and also faster. So by looking at these numbers, you can think about the fact that a white box that remains unbroken for 28 days or 12 days can already give you some meaningful level of security. Because of, if you recall, we're always talking about software programs, right? And the advantage of dealing with software programs is that they are easier to update than, so in contrast with the hardware or with the gray box attack scenario, it's a bit more difficult to update a hardware cryptographic implementations, of course. So if we are able to update it before the adversary manages to break it, then we will cancel out the efforts of the adversary, because by the time he managed to break it, that implementation is not valid anymore. But we can also consider the fact that since we're talking about software, we might have a bit more freedom and a bit more space for adding countermeasures, right? And we should also think of this opportunity we should also see this as an opportunity to try to have designs that remain unbroken for a while. So and yeah, just a small note on the second edition from last year. The winning challenge remained unbroken for 51 days, which is even better. The competition rules changed a little bit. I will not get so much into detail, but there were three challenges that remained unbroken during the competition phase, and they were only broken later when the competition was over. And yeah, we had all three of them remain unbroken for longer than during the first edition of the competition. So, in fact, there is ways of making life very difficult for the adversary. So now, one thing that it's worth noting is that if you have a white box that is vulnerable to automated attacks, then this white box is really not going to be very useful at all, because people are going to be able to break it very, very quickly. And so here you cannot talk about a useful level of security, right? Whereas if you have a white box that resists these attacks, then the adversary is going to need to look into the code. Then you're going to need also to have an adversary with much more experience, who's able to peel off encodings or peel off obfuscation layers. And so we care a lot about these automated attacks and achieving resistance against them. So now let's talk a little bit more in detail about the automated attacks here. So they were introduced in 2015 or 16 in parallel, here by Boss et al. And San Felix et al. And the story behind it, so first we have like this differential computation analysis, which is the software counterpart of differential power analysis. The story behind that attack was that one of the authors of this paper was assessing the security of white boxes, and he just thought, okay, I'm just gonna try to see if I can use my differential power analysis tools to attack them and see what happens. And so he went on, and it turned out that it worked. And yeah, they were very happy about it. And I think a lot of people in the community were happy to see that you could attack white boxes in this way. And then the other group of authors introduced differential fault analysis on white box implementations, and these are conducted in exactly the same way as in hardware, except that introducing the fault is easier because you just modify the code. So I mentioned before, so what we see here is a software trace, and as you can see, it consists of values which are either 0 or 1, and this software trace corresponds to the memory addresses that were accessed during the encryption process. And so yeah, what we do is we select messages and we perform some encryptions, record the software traces, and then analyze them. So now let's look more in detail to this differential computation analysis. What we do here, so okay, we encrypt a number of messages, and then we record a software trace every time we're encrypting a message. And then we say like this message corresponds to this software trace, and so on and so on. So then in the second step, we define a selection function. So if you recall, in AES we have states, which is basically so a state is the value that is currently being processed or that is outputted after some operation performed during AES. And so we define a selection function that is going to correspond to the value that a state may have, depending on the key that we're using. And our selection function, in this case, is going to correspond to the state that we have right after the subbytes operation. So here, yeah, we have some key dependency because we have added the key before that, and then we have the subbytes operation. So yeah, subbytes operation is publicly known. So the only thing that we don't know is the key. So we're going to have key candidates, and we're going to guess the key. So the idea is that if we have a correct key guess, we're going to see correlations with our statistical analysis. And so what we do then on the third part is that we're going to focus on one bit of the state calculated by our selection function. And then if for one trace that bit is 0, we're going to group that trace in one bucket here on the left side. And if for that bit, if for that trace that bit is 1, we're going to group it on the second one. And so if you remember the differential power analysis attack, this probably already looks familiar. We're doing exactly the same thing, but just with software traces. And so the idea is that if we are using the correct key candidate, we are actually grouping correctly. We're grouping accordingly to what the actual value of the state is there. And then, yeah, we calculate the mean value of each bucket, of all the traces located in each bucket or in each set. And then we calculate the mean, the mean of the two buckets. And yeah, if we're lucky and if we made a correct key guess, we might obtain a trace as the one that you see down here. And as you see, it's a really nice trace because it doesn't really have noise for the correct key guess. Like these peaks have a value of 1. The fact that the traces don't have noise makes it also a bit easier because we don't need to collect as many traces as when performing a power analysis attack. Because yeah, just maybe a couple of them are going to be enough for this attack to work. Yeah, and then observing such peaks, it's going to let us know that we grouped our traces correctly and that our key guess was correct. Okay. And so when looking a bit more into detail to what happened here is that given that our key guess was correct and we actually calculated the actual state, the actual value of the state correctly, and we grouped accordingly. For instance, here on the you see on the trace that the sample number 300 has a peak of value 1. What happened here is that for every trace that was grouped on the set A0 on the left bucket, that bit had a value of 0, and for every trace that was grouped on the set on the right one, that bit had a value of 1. So when we calculated the means of each set, the mean for A0 had a value of 0, and the mean of the bucket in A1 had a value of 1, and then subtracting them gave us a value of 1. And that's why we obtain peaks so high. And so another thing will...
Yeah, I wanted to ask now if there's any questions from now. And yeah, so in the next part, we're going to look a bit more in detail on why the attack works. So.
We have one question, which was asking about why you are not using Boolean masking for scheme.
Yeah. So I am aware that in the white box competitions, some candidates use Boolean masking, but I don't know exactly how they applied it in this sense.
But in any case, it's not clear that it achieves full independence from the data. So, so the kind of the yeah.
I think Nasur had one question in the last break. I'm not sure if you want to ask it once again, or maybe we can leave it to the end of session.
The one with mixing bijections, was it?
No, he was trying to ask it vocally, but we decided to continue. I'm not sure he's ready to ask, or maybe Nasur, are you ready to ask your question, or do you want to leave it to the end of the session? Another question from Vahid.
Yeah, with order of masking. Yeah, indeed. So there was in the first edition of the competition, we found a candidate that applied masking, and then we were able to break it using first order DCA. And then, but it was certainly much more difficult. So it took I think a total of 16 hours to break, compared to the 1 or less hour that would take to break, like the normal one. And then there were some other candidates that we were not able to break. We suspected higher order of masking was used in this case, but here, if your masking is applied obfuscated, like if it's obfuscated well in such way that it's difficult to disassemble it or remove it, then it will be equivalently secure to when you apply masking to the hardware implementations, and thus you would need a second, like first, second, third order DCA or DPA to break it. So in this case, it's exactly the same, except that you need to take care that when the adversary looks at the implementation, he's not able to disassemble the masking or remove it.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, we shall continue. At the end of the session, we will have another break and we might have some more questions.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Oh, just a second.
Our difference of means curve looked like this, is that the outputs or the values of the states, in this case, they were not encoded. So if you recall in the beginning, when we were talking about the Chow framework, we said that we mentioned that the outputs of a lookup table are encoded. So in this case, the outputs of a lookup table, they correspond to a state. And here we know that they're not encoded because it turns out that with our selection function and with the correct key guess, we always calculated exactly the same state that was actually being processed. And we recall that with our selection function, we did not consider any transformations, but we were calculating like raw state values. And so in here, it turned out that in our left bucket, all the target bits had the value 0, and in our right bucket, all the target bits had the value 1. And so this could have only happened if we really correctly calculated each state. And so in this example, this graph that we see, or this, we obtained it when attacking a white box that was not using any encodings. And so let's see again how the encodings are applied in this white box implementation. So this corresponds to the Chow framework, and here, so as you see, the output of the T box in this case is the same value that we're considering with our selection function. And then you see this square with an A. This corresponds to a linear transformation, and then you see the O1 and O2, and this corresponds to non-linear transformations that are applied. So we get the output of the T box, which is the state, and we transform it by a linear transformation, like a matrix multiplication, for instance, and then that result is transformed by non-linear bijections in this case. And yeah, we separate so the output of the linear transformation is split in two, and then we obtain two nibbles, and then we apply a linear transformation to one nibble, and we apply a linear transformation to another nibble. So the idea of applying this nibble permutations or these nibble transformations was with the purpose of saving space and not having them lookup tables that would blow up too much if we would apply a byte permutation. But unfortunately, this is exactly one of the reasons that led to the success of the DCA attack on white boxes that were actually encoded. So now we're going to analyze what happens when we perform the DCA attack on a white box implementation, which is using these encodings. So yeah, we recall that this T box corresponds to the, so it's a lookup table which corresponds to the key addition and the S box operation of the AS. And then this is the same operation that we are trying to recalculate with our selection function in the DCA attack. So what we're going to do is we're going to analyze what happens if we have a white box which encodes the T boxes only with a linear transformation or only with non-linear encodings, or what happens when it uses both, which corresponds to the Chow framework. So let's start with seeing what happens if the T boxes of the white box are encoded only using linear encodings. And so, as we recall, the linear encodings here, they're basically a matrix multiplication. So here we see a vector with x1, x2, and so on. And this vector corresponds to the output of the T box, which in this case is a byte. So it's a byte. It consists of 8 bits, and then what we do is we encode each bit via this matrix A. And yes, so it's just a simple matrix multiplication. Yeah, and so if you're familiar with matrix multiplications,
you can see that if this matrix A is generated at random, then what we have is the bit that corresponds, so the encoded bit that corresponds, for instance, to x1 is going to be a random linear combination of all the bits within the byte, like x1, x2, and so on and so on. So in this case, since it's a random linear combination of all the bits, in many cases we will actually mask the bits very well, and in this case the DCA attack is not really going to be successful. So we, in fact, we could obtain such a difference of means trace where we don't see any correlation at all. So this means, yeah, that all bits were masked correctly, and our analysis didn't really work. However, there might be some cases where this is not what happens, depending on the properties of the matrix. And so, for example, if the matrix has one row which only has one value set to 1 and all other values are 0, then what's going to happen is that whenever we encode the bit corresponding to that row, there's going to be one bit in the byte whose value is not going to be masked, because yeah, we're going to multiply the bit value times 1, and then every time we XOR with some other bit, it's all going to be zeros, because all values were multiplied by zeros. So that one bit value is not going to be masked at all. And then when we perform a DCA attack and we target that specific bit, we in fact are going to see some correlations, and we're gonna obtain peak values of 1, because we're gonna have the exact same situation that we described some minutes ago when we were explaining how the DCA attack works. So yeah, so in fact, so in practice, you wouldn't really use like you wouldn't really only use the linear transformations for encoding your T-boxes, because then reverse engineering them is a little bit easier, right? Like you additionally apply the nonlinear transformations. But yeah, in fact, if we don't if we only use linear transformations and then our matrix does not have an identity row, then in fact we could expect resistance against the DCA attack. Yeah, nevertheless, the DCA attack can still be adapted relatively easily in such way that it is successful in any, yeah, it is successful for any T-box encoded via any matrix in this case. Like we just need to modify it a little bit, and it's a little bit more expensive, the attack, but it's still successful. So yeah, so not really a countermeasure. And yeah, if you guys are interested, we can discuss how this modification takes place afterwards. So now let's see what happens when we apply only nonlinear encoded nonlinear encodings. And so we recall here that the output of the T-box is a byte, and then it's split in 2. And so we obtain nibbles, and then each nibble is encoded via a nonlinear transformation. And yeah, this is nothing more than a bijection. So a nibble is simply mapped to some other value at random. And so here the DCA attack is successful. As I will explain next, yeah, this I always find a little bit difficult to explain this case, but yeah, if anybody is interested, we can discuss it a bit more in detail afterwards. But so what happens here again? So yeah, so I repeat, the output of the T-box is a byte, and then for encoding it, we split this output into 2 nibbles. And then some nibble value is always mapped to the same encoded nibble value. So now let's say that we are performing the DCA attack, and let's say that we are using the correct key candidate. So this means that our selection function is calculating everything correctly. But this corresponds, of course, to the values that you see on the left, like this x1, x2, x3.
and not really to the values that you see on the right, because we don't really know which nibble is going to be mapped to which nibble when we encode. But yeah, let's say that we're calculating correctly with our selection function, and then for let's say also that we're using a lot of traces, like a lot of inputs access. So we have to recall that for each byte that is outputted from the T-box, the nibbles are going to show up a larger number of times. Like for instance, a byte can have up to 128 different values. However, each nibble value shows up a total of 16 times for this 128 different values. And so whenever we are performing the attack and we're grouping the traces, for each nibble value that shows up, we're going to group a corresponding encoded trace, to say it like that, which we don't know exactly which values it corresponds to, but that trace is always going to be grouped in the same bucket. So one part of the software trace is going to correspond to this encoded nibble, and that part is always going to be the same every time we calculate the same nibble. So yeah, I hope that this gives you an idea. But then what happens is that we're going to have a lot of traces with those parts that are equal in one bucket, and this is of course going to influence the value of that bucket or of that set when we calculate the mean. And then on the other bucket, on the other mean, we're going to have the same situation, and this is also going to influence the value of the mean. So it's going to pull the mean value towards 0, and one is going to pull it towards 0, and then on the other it's going to pull it towards 1. So for some sample in the software trace, and then when we calculate the difference of means, this is going to be shown, and we're going to see some correlation. So as you see here, we see some peaks, and they are not as high. They are not 1 anymore, but they are significantly higher than what we see for other values in the trace. Like we see peaks of values 0.25 and 0.5 and even 0.75. So yeah, we have this documented very nicely in another paper published in the ACNS 2018 called On the Ineffectiveness of Internal Encodings, and there we give a really nice analysis to this. And so now let's see what happens when we have a T-box which is encoded via a linear transformation and then via this non-linear encodings, which is, again, this is what's actually what was actually proposed in the Chow et al. Framework. So now let's analyze how these values are encoded, and then if we're actually obtaining what we want. So for some values in the half of the output of the T-box, so on one nibble of the output of the T-box, this is going to be encoded via the matrix. So in this case, the result encoded value is going to depend on the first 4 rows of the matrix. And so ideally, we would like that any bit here or any nibble value of the output of the T-box can be transformed into any possible nibble value. If that is the case, then we could expect some resistance against the DCA attack, because any nibble value can be transformed into any other random nibble value, and then this is going to be the input to the encodings, to the nonlinear encodings, and then yeah, we will not be able to detect correlations when performing the DCA attack. However, the matrix, so again, as I say, this depends all on the first 4 rows of the matrix. But this matrix may have some properties such that these nibbles may not really be transformed into any possible nibble value, but only into a subset of nibble values, a subset, like maybe, for instance, they're only able to be transformed into 8 possible different nibble values, depending on the nibble, of course. And then what's going to happen is that for those nibbles, we're always going to obtain some nibble in this subset. And then again, it's always this subset of nibbles that's going to be encoded via the same non-linear encodings. And then we're going to be back in a similar situation to what was described previously when we only had non-linear encodings. So yeah, so again, this one, I hope I'm giving you an idea of what's happening. This depends on, so this is highly dependent on the properties of the matrix, and more precisely is dependent on the rank of the matrix in this case. And yeah, again, I'm happy to discuss it more in detail if anybody's interested. But if in fact, if we have a matrix with those properties, with those non-favorable properties, then we might obtain difference of means curves that again show values, show high peak values that are not 1 but are high enough for showing correlations. And so this is a difference of means obtained when attacking an open implementation of Chow et al.'s framework. And as you can see, we have peak values of 1. And so the DCA attack has been further improved in different works. Like it has been extended, and there has also been papers publishing how to implement like a higher order DCA attack. But also, yeah, some ideas for implementing countermeasures have been introduced, and for instance, one can design the white box in such way that for every message that you encrypt, you perform your encryption somehow a little bit different. Like you kind of you implement some randomness based on the input message, to say it that way, and then this might lead to some misalignments of the traces, or difference in the sizes of the traces, or things like that. So then it's going to be more difficult to perform a DCA attack. Definitely, it's going to be more difficult in an automated way. And white boxes today, they take into consideration these attacks. So designers take into consideration these attacks, and so they're implemented in such a way that they should be robust against such attacks. It shouldn't be so easy to perform DCA or DFA on such white boxes. Okay. So what is left to do in the field of white box crypto, besides, of course, constructing a secure white box implementation? So we listed here some ideas of things that, some research directions that might be interesting to go to, and that would be welcomed by the community. So one idea is we would have definitional studies which suit better the real world, in the sense that when we define security for an encryption scheme, we consider a polynomial time adversary. And then if this adversary is able to break the security of the implementation, he's considered successful. But in reality, the adversary, so in the context of white box, the adversary might not really have that much time available for breaking it. Because as we said, we can update the white boxes on a regular basis, and then by updating them, we cancel the efforts of the adversary. So if we could have some definitional studies which somehow capture this notion that the adversary has less time for breaking the white box than it takes, for instance, for a new white box to be compiled. It's not very simple to capture like a good. I'm not sure exactly what would be a good way of capture of having such definitional studies, but I'm sure that would be welcome in this case. Then another idea is study methods of implementing a dynamic white box with key rotation. So if you recall, with the mobile payment applications, we had a white box program which first had a decryption program, and then it decrypted some value, and then with that value, it set that value to be the key of another program, and then we generate some request message there. And so usually, for instance, with this Chow et al. Implementation, or with all white box implementations we've been talking about right now, we were considering a white box with a static key, with one specific key. It doesn't change, and it hasn't. We don't really have many, or we don't. I think we don't have any paper, at least, that studies some methodologies of implementing such a white box with a dynamic key. I know that some methods are published in the form of patents, but it would be welcome in the community to have some more transparent ways of implementing such different types of white boxes. Another interesting thing, is if we would have some assessment or some standardized assessment methodology for white boxes. So for assessing the security of the white boxes and then qualifying the security of these white boxes. So the thing here is that if you go to the internet and you see some companies who are selling white box solutions, they will advertise them as secure white box implementations. And what security means is different for each person depending the field they're coming from. And yeah, in the cryptography community, many people or everybody's going to say, yeah, that's not true what they're saying, because I don't believe that that white box is secure, because I'm sure it can be broken somehow. However, it would be interesting if we would have some standardized way of saying, okay, this white box is secure because it resists this line of attacks, and therefore it has security level 1, for instance. And so it would be nice if we can standardize how such qualification is given. Like if we test a line of attacks against a white box, and then if it's then we can qualify which attacks are successful to it and which not. And so ideas can be taken from this publication we had, where we performed a line of attacks on candidates of the Chess 2017 Capture the Flag Challenge. And yeah, I'm sure in that assessment that we made, there's room for improvement, you know, like for making a more complete assessment. But it would be nice to simply just try all types of attacks on the white box and then really give a mark there, and then, you know, also have a kind of a bound on the speed that we expect from a white box, or the size that we expect from a white box in that sense. And another interesting maybe field that can be explored a little bit in the context of white box is to see how incompressible white box ciphers or constructions can be useful in the bounded retrieval model. So in the bounded retrieval model, we have an adversary who is only able to extract certain amount of information, or with regards to a key that he's trying to exfiltrate. And in 2016, a big key symmetric encryption was introduced by Bellare, Kane, and Rogoway. And in big key symmetric encryption, you had ciphers which would perform encryption with a key of a very, very large size, but then decryption could be performed with a key of a smaller size. So here you can see that this somehow sounds a little bit similar to what we were discussing for incompressibility, because in incompressibility we had a key of conventional size, or a cipher which uses a key of conventional size, and then via our white box compiler we would obtain some incompressible key of a very large size, which is then equivalent, or which is meant to be used within a cipher which is equivalent to the one of conventional size. And so, yeah, this in fact gives the idea that, okay, maybe in this case we can use the incompressible key, big K, for performing the encryptions, and then the conventional key, small k, for performing the decryptions. And yeah, this has not really been explored yet. Like if you recall, there was a large list of papers presenting incompressible constructions. So it hasn't been shown, or it hasn't really been studied how these constructions fit
in the bounded retrieval model, or if they can be candidates for big key symmetric encryptions. Perhaps it's something trivial to do, but in any case, it would be interesting because it would give incompressible white box constructions a new application that indeed seems to be very interesting. Okay, so yeah, we still have a small discussion in the end of the video, but since we're some minutes over time, maybe maybe we can have some more questions coming.
Yes, we have 10 minutes for possible questions. Any questions from the audience?
There was a question in the chat that Chris was answering while the video was being played, and the question was, so if the matrix used for encoding the T boxes, if it is public, and yeah, so it's not publicly known which matrix it's used. So they are generated at random every time you compile the white box newly. And yeah, if the matrix, if we would know which matrix was being used, we could just integrate that matrix in our selection function when we are performing the DCA attack, and then we could perform it much easier. So the idea is that this matrix should remain secret. And the same with the bijections used for the nonlinear encodings.
We have one question from, yes. Go on, Siavash.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for great presentation regarding, I can say, attractive topics. I want to ask one question regarding external encoding that show present that you didn't discuss. I saw that you told binding the hardware to the implementation. That I didn't get. It seems that it was for 2016, and I don't know exactly for when. But I saw that when I was thinking regarding your idea that you was explaining, I saw that we can use it instead of external encoding that show present. Am I correct? Can I say this one? Can I conclude?
Yes, so the external encodings were presented as a method of binding your white box to something else. So in the sense that you have something else, maybe it's hardware or some other software program that encodes accordingly to the external encodings of the white box. If you place this encoding algorithm in the hardware, then your white box is going to be bound to that to that hardware in this case, because only via that hardware you will encode your values correctly. I think in the Chow paper they didn't specify if they're meant to be used with another hardware device or just with another software program. But yeah, that's exactly the idea. And in the presentation we talked about the way we talked about hardware binding was a bit as getting a response from the hardware, similar to how signature works. But both approaches are valid for implementing hardware binding. If this, but I don't know if this answers your question.
Yes, it was great. Exactly, I was talking about that. It seems that you generalize the idea of external encoding and say that we should bind to the hardware. It's not important external encoding. We should bind. External encoding, one type of binding, it seems.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next one that I want to ask, because you explained this one, but I want to I want to again ask that one because it is one important point for me. I can say that mixing bijections or linear transformation are important against DCA and DP. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly. So for DCA, unfortunately, they are important if we perform DCA the way we described it in this presentation, where our selection function does exactly the same as what where our selection function just recalculates the state. But imagine if we adapt our DCA in such a way that instead of recalculating, so after recalculating the state, we try out all linear combinations of the bits in that state.
Okay.
And then we try to group according to these linear combinations. In this case, there's going to be one combination for which is going to correspond exactly to the combination we get from the linear transformation.
Okay. So it means that it made it hard, but it is possible again.
Yeah, it is possible again, and in fact, yeah, the attack is much more efficient in this case. So yeah. So
on another point, based on the DCA that I saw, the DCA, I can say the presenters of DCA implements on one implementation, I saw that it was in Golang. It was in Golang, one implementation. I saw that they attacked on that. I saw that it was for one person that the name is Macmillion. Even it have on GitHub for that. I saw that when they increase the traces, even without any new, I can say, applying some, I can say, linear transformation, it was possible to attack against with even mixing bijection. Am I correct this one regarding this one?
Yes. So they perform the DCA attack in the same way that we described it in right now in the presentation.
Exactly.
And I don't recall exactly in the so they attack 5 different candidates, and I think some of them have only one type of encodings, like only mixing bijections, and some have both. And in all cases, the attack is successful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Because, and this has to do with the third property that we explain in the video, the third case. That the matrix, the upper part of the matrix might have some characteristics that don't allow the nibbles to be encoded into any possible nibble, or that they cannot be. It's I always find it hard to say it, but like for some nibbles, you cannot expect them to be transformed into any possible nibble, but only into a subset of nibble values.
Okay, thank you. I will check that one that you told. I remember, but I didn't got exactly. I will check it again in the video that will recorded now. If I have question, shall I ask question by mail from you?
Yes, of course.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you, Alpirez. Thank you, Chris. It was a very great presentation. On behalf of the organizing committee of ISC Winter School on Information Security and Cryptography, I want to thank you for your insightful presentation today, and hope to have another talk in the next year or maybe the near future. Thank you all. We will have,
thanks to everyone for the engaged discussion, and especially big thanks to the organizers for creating the opportunity for this experience.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, we really appreciate it. And yes, if anyone has questions later, please ping us, and we hope that maybe next year we might be able to come in person. That would be very nice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The audience, we will have another talk at 15 Iran time from Professor Johan Diamond. The title is On the Security of Keyed Hash Functions, which starts in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.